I got divorced from my husband, who was a man that always stood up for his sister. I suggested he have her find a job instead of just lounging around at home. He yelled at me, calling me vicious. She later racked up gambling debts but sent people to come after me to pay them. You're my sister-in-law. You're the one who kept pushing me to work, and look where it got me. I turned to my parents, but they turned me away, slamming the door in my face. My husband chose to divorce me and leave me behind. The debt accumulated with interest, and I was eventually retaliated against, dying miserably on the streets. Now that I've come back to life, I'm not choosing this husband again. No one is going to make a fool out of me anymore. Mandy was sprawled on the couch, legs crossed, watching TV and munching on chips. But when she looked at me, it was like she'd seen an enemy. Seeing the familiar scene, I teared up. I'm back again. It was just like last time. Suggesting she get a job made her run to my husband in tears. She made it sound like I was picking on her for no reason. I felt so wronged and wanted to talk to my husband, but his cold stare stopped me in my tracks. She's just a kid. Why can't you just let it go? If you keep this up, we'll get a divorce. Back then, those words were a shock, making me see him for who he really was. I didn't argue. Just let my marriage with Mike grow cold until Mandy's actions got me killed on the street. Luckily, things can be different now. I looked Mandy straight in the eyes, didn't say a word, and headed back to my room. Her voice was loud enough that I could hear her complaining to Mike about me over the phone despite me having shut the door. She kept repeating the same things, twisting stories to make me out as a villainous sister-in-law. Meanwhile, I rummaged around the room for our marriage certificate. I was determined to be the one to ask Mike for a divorce this time. I wasn't going to stay in this toxic pit any longer. Finding the certificate was like a weight off my shoulders, so I tucked it safely away. I heard some noise outside the door. Helen, are you fighting with Mandy again? Typical man, assuming everything's my fault without even hearing me out. I just rolled my eyes and opened the door. We're divorcing tomorrow. Mike stood there, stunned. Helen, what's gotten into you? Watching Mandy hide behind Mike, I smirked a bit sarcastically. Didn't your dear sister tell you everything? He immediately pulled her closer and yelled, Mandy's still a child. Can't you just let it go for once? That comment had me laughing from frustration. I earn a good salary and even got promoted to a general manager spot at my company after the years there. Yet Mandy's habits were insatiable. She wanted all the best things, without ever having worked, all on my dime. She'd make me hand wash her undergarments because her hands were too delicate for water. I did all the work and the cooking, the household chores were all on me, and yet she always had something snide to say. The life I wanted, she lived through with my help, buying whatever expensive thing she wanted, calling me for money whenever her funds ran dry. There were high-end brands like Hermes bags and Givenchy jewelry Mandy bought without a second thought. I mentioned this to Mike once, only for him to say I was small-minded and trying to drive a wedge between them. We had a massive fight and parted ways awkwardly. No way would I keep being her maid now. I was done. I stepped outside, booked myself a room at a 5-star hotel to enjoy some services, and for the first time, felt a sense of relief. With my phone off, I finally had a peaceful sleep. The next day, I saw several missed calls and messages on my phone. Mike went from being cautious in one message to viciously showing his petty side in the next. I skimmed through and deleted them all with a single click. I only sent him one message, meet me at 8 this morning. As soon as I sent it, Mike called. Helen, you're talking divorce over something this small? Have I been too lenient with you? Cut the crap, 8 o'clock at the Civil Bureau. If you don't agree, I'll just proceed legally. With that, I hung up, and as expected, he didn't show by 8. I went over to a law firm, got someone to handle things for me, and since I was paying, they happily obliged. I even hired some security to help me move my things out. I had an apartment of my own before marriage, perfect to move back into now. When I got to the house, there was Mandy fussing over Mike, trying to calm him. Hearing me at the door, they turned to look, and anger crossed Mike's face. "You're actually back. After all those calls I made." But when he saw the sturdy-looking men behind me, he bit back his words. Stammering a bit, he asked, "What's all this about?" "Moving out." Mike looked utterly shocked. Mandy couldn't keep still either. She jumped up with a shrill voice, "Helen, for such a trivial thing, why blow this up?" "Please," Mandy loved pretending she had the moral high ground. I couldn't care less for more argument. I just signaled the men to start moving stuff out. Amid Mandy's screeching, the movers either packed things up according to my list or smashed what couldn't be taken. In just half an hour, what once was a cozy home turned into chaos. When it was over, I looked at the pair from above. "I've hired a lawyer, we'll see each other in court." "Helen." Mike's helpless frustration was almost amusing. While waiting for the court stuff to get settled, I was pretty relaxed, except Mike would bother me now and then, even finding allies. "Mom, stay out of this. Now that you're divorcing, you'll be second-hand goods. Who'd want you after this? According to Mike, you've blown this out of proportion for a minor issue. You divorcing has brought shame on us, don't expect to see us again. We have no daughter like you." Hearing my mom siding with them just left me cold inside. In the past, I was cornered by loan sharks and went to them for help. A closed door and a disownment letter shoved through was all I got. The despair from that moment has stuck with me. I hung up the phone without saying anything. In my memories, I felt like a guest relative at home, where they treated me politely but distantly. But when they saw the neighbor's boy, they wore a smile I'd never seen. Fate played a cruel joke on them. They never had another child. Mike's parents passed away, and after getting married, my parents treated him like their own son. Any grievances? I was the one who had to endure them so that their precious son wouldn't leave. The next day after work, I saw Mike holding a bouquet of roses, standing outside my office building. When he saw me, he started walking over with fake sincerity. "Helen, forgive me, it's all my fault." Amidst the bustling post-work crowd, that splash of color stood out. People slowed down to watch us, and I frowned, annoyed by his antics. Seeing my irritation, a flicker of gloom crossed his face, but he knelt on one knee anyway. "Helen, forgive me." Whispers rose around us. "Isn't that Helen? Is that her husband?" "Yeah, she's so fierce at work, can't believe she's the same at home. Her husband's apologizing like that, and she doesn't even let him off." Hearing this, Mike seemed a little pleased and put on an even bigger show. "What happened with Mandy was my fault, but she's just my sister. Please forgive me." Mike's words were vague, yet the message was crystal clear. My expression hardened as I slapped him twice, unreservedly. "Get lost. Have you grown spineless living off me? I make more money than you. What are you good for?" Gasps echoed around us. Previously, I'd been mindful of his male ego, never pointing this out. At home he'd make big decisions, and I kept things running smoothly. Mike stood up in anger and threw the flowers to the ground. "How dare you hit my brother?" As soon as she said it, Mandy came charging at me, furiously. I scoffed and swung my purse, aiming it at her. "Mandy." Mike quickly stepped in front of her, hugging her protectively. Then he yelled at me, "Why hit her? If you've got a problem, take it out on me." Seeing him act so heroic, I just found it amusing. We'd long been loveless, and now who was this act meant to impress? Himself maybe? Get out of my way. Go act out your sibling drama somewhere else. I'm trying to get home. With that, I left. The next day at work, pretty much everyone gave me looks, their eyes filled with gossip and schadenfreude. "Did you hear? Helen the GM might be getting promoted to VP, but with that scene yesterday with her husband, it's probably over for her. A woman rising so high, can you imagine? Look at how earnest her husband was, and she didn't give him a break. She's spoiled, plain and simple." I barged into the break room hearing all this, seeing John with a smug look on his face. What a repulsive guy. Being my rival, he thrived on belittling me for his ego boost. When I saw his startled, guilty expression, I threw my coffee at his face. First thing in the morning, and that mouth stinks. Here's some coffee to wash it out. Nobody dared say a word as they gasped. Brown coffee dripped from his repulsive face, silence filling the room. If you believe I climbed my way up through a man, why don't you ask David? John, worry about your own performance instead of what's going on with me. Talk when you surpass me. Before, I cared about the colleague relations or bore the weight of family, ignoring rumors for peace. Yet, those very rumors cost me a huge promotion opportunity. This time, I wasn't backing down. Helen, David wants to see you. The knock on the door snapped me out of my thoughts. Walking into the office, there was John, sucking up to David. Seeing me, he shot me a sneaky grin. I sensed something bad, and right then David handed me his phone. Helen, what do you make of this? The scene on the phone was all too familiar, my argument with Mike caught on tape. I thought for a moment and cautiously tried to explain to David, this is personal. I'm in the middle of a divorce. David's expression turned serious, his gaze piercing. You know the rumors, Helen. We've actually been discussing promoting you to VP, but this situation is disastrous. How can she focus at work with such a messy home life? I'm only thinking about the company, David. Helen's just one woman, she can't handle this burden alone, John chimed in, desperate for credit. David ignored him, speaking to me sincerely, this video has gone viral online, Helen. The chatter is affecting the company's image and it can really impact your career advancement. You need to think this through. That hit hard. Something that happened just yesterday, now so huge on the internet. Clearly, someone was stirring the pot. I checked my phone and sure enough, it was all over the trending topics. Husband begs for reconciliation but gets slapped. Should mistakes be forgiven? Is protecting a sister really wrong? Seeing all kinds of headlines made me furious. Mike and his family sure know how to cause trouble, it's hard not to see this as intentional. A clean break to start anew. But getting home, I found Mike had brought my parents over uninvited. Seeing my mom serving tea to Mike really annoyed me. Mom, why are you here? And how did you even get in? Didn't you listen to what I said last time? If it weren't for Mingzi, we wouldn't know you still haven't dropped the lawsuit. What do you want, ruining your own life like this? My mom slammed her teacup on the table, making an obnoxious noise. She came here all fired up, obviously to confront me. The moment she walked in, it was clear this was a no-nonsense visit. I'm definitely getting a divorce. No matter what you say, nothing will change my mind. I said firmly, keeping a straight face. If we're here to talk about this, there's nothing to discuss. Please leave. Oh, I see, you think you're tough now. Talking to your mom like this, it's killing me, right in the heart. My mom clutched her chest, looking like she could barely breathe, an expression full of pain. I just stared. It's been like this my whole life. Every time we had a disagreement, she'd play this card to make me cave. Mike helped my mom calm down and then smiled at me, saying, if this is about my sister, don't worry. She's working now and living on her own. She won't bother us. I had to fight the urge to roll my eyes at Mike's confidence, like I'd just forgive everything because of his little speech. Mike, you're just too nice. We know your sister Mandy, she's kind and pretty. Helen's spoiled, that's why things are like this. My dad nodded in approval at Mike, but when he looked at me, his eyes were full of disappointment. Helen, I've told you, no matter how capable you think you are, you're still just a woman. You need to support your husband and raise your kids. Focus on your home life with Mike, having a son is more important than your career. My mom nodded in agreement beside him. It's hard not to feel cold-hearted witnessing this. My own parents siding with outsiders and belittling their own daughter, making me feel worthless. I stayed silent, just feeling so weary. Seeing my lack of reaction, my mom stood up angrily and yelled, "Helen, if you dare go through with this divorce, just don't expect us to be your family." Hearing that made my heart clench. I had prepared myself for this, but it still brought tears to my eyes. These were my parents, whom I once respected and loved. Fine, then. Act like I was never born. I'm determined to get this divorce. You brat. How did I raise someone like you? I felt one side of my face go numb. My mom raised her hand again, seemingly ready to slap me once more. Even though half my face was numb, I stood my ground, facing her defiance. Meanwhile, Mike stood there like this had nothing to do with him. Get out of my house, all of you. I grabbed a broom leaning against the wall, using it to usher them out, hitting Mike a few times while doing so. Helen, have you lost your mind? I couldn't hold back my tears any longer, overwhelmed by the injustice I felt. I kept swinging the broom wildly, ignoring their curses. Once I slammed the door shut, I collapsed against it, trying to steady my emotions. It stayed noisy outside for a while before finally calming down. I collected myself and called my lawyer. I want my divorce case handled quickly, money isn't an issue. Satisfied with the reassurance from the other end of the line, I took a deep breath and picked up my phone to get back to work. I noticed I had nearly 100 unread messages. Opening them, I found a slew of nasty comments. People called me heartless, abusive to my sister-in-law, and worse. I deleted them all in one go, then focused on my work. After I submitted some proposals, David actually suggested I take some time off, saying work could wait. Turns out the video's popularity hadn't waned, and some people had even tracked me down at work, threatening to get me fired. Problems just kept piling up. I needed to find out who was stirring the pot. To get to the bottom of it, I asked a friend to find someone who was good with computers, to track this person down. The next day, I got news. It was from an account called Mandy Not Cry. No surprise, it was my sister-in-law Mandy. She's been going wild on social media, sharing her sob story with clueless folks, twisting facts, and painting me as the evil sister-in-law. That's how this mess started. I reported all this to my lawyer, who advised that I clear things up. Gathering proof that Mandy had been using my money, I marked everything clearly. Following my lawyer's advice, I recorded a video explaining the story exactly as it was, debunking Mandy's claims with solid evidence. The video went viral as soon as it was released. My words made sense, and I even had proof of her spending. The tide turned online, and people began targeting Mandy instead. Everything was finally going in the right direction. My divorce case with Mike was moving forward too. After that incident, my parents and Mandy kept their distance. At the courthouse, Mike walked ahead without even giving me a glance. Mandy clung to my parents' arms, smugly lifting her chin at me. When my parents saw me, the smiles faded from their faces. As if angry at me, they patted Mandy's hand like a close family would. Let's go. In just 2 short hours, the court declared our marriage over. Mike and I were finally divorced. Mike looked unsatisfied, but I understood it was because I filed for the divorce. His pride was hurt. I never believed he wanted to stay married out of love. It was clear they were all selfish. Living under the same roof, Mike never defended me from Mandy's torment. If I trust another man again, then I'd deserve whatever happens next. Afterwards, my parents comforted Mike and shot a few daggers my way, while Mandy couldn't contain her glee. Giggling, she ran over to me, pretending to lament, "Helen, oh wait, you're no longer related to my brother. Is it okay if I still call you Helen? Don't ever think about my brother again. Who cares if you dislike me? You're just a discarded woman." This time, Mike was nowhere near Mandy. She came over on her own. I grabbed her by the collar and slapped her 4 times across the face. Mandy screamed continuously, "You witch, I'm going to kill you for hitting me. Mike, come help me." Mike rushed over at the sound like a mother hen, shoving me aside to pull Mandy into a hug. "Helen. We're divorced, and you're still hitting Mandy, why? Mandy, does it hurt? Let me help. These siblings are disgusting, and I rolled my eyes without holding back. You'd have to ask your dear sister why she got in my face barking like a dog. Mandy, in Mike's arms, was crying like a storm with her cheeks red, looking pitiful. Mike was so mad he blurted out, "There's no way my sister would say anything to you, stop making stuff up." Don't blame Helen, it's all my fault, it has nothing to do with her. Mandy shrank into Mike's embrace, clutching his collar tightly, her eyes full of tears. I said rudely, "You're such a big fool, being played around by your own sister. If your sister is a good person, I'd run naked doing a handstand." Helen. We had another falling out. Not long after, I received a letter from my parents severing ties. The words felt like daggers to my heart. I signed it and sent it back. I'll never understand why my parents sided with outsiders, but I didn't want to dwell on things without answers. Online gossip gradually died down, and Mandy's account was deactivated. I went back to work. Everything started to get back to normal. Until one day, after work, I saw David leading a familiar-looking girl to a car. I squinted and realized it was Mandy. In a flash, it all started to make sense. If Mandy and David had something going on, then the video could be explained. Looked like they teamed up to set me up. I whipped out my phone and snapped some photos. When I zoomed in, they were shamelessly making out. The scene was so gross. David, a bald guy in his 40s, practically devouring a girl in her 20s, a pathetic sight. I also recorded a video and drove off before I lost my appetite. I didn't know how their little escapade went last night, but seeing David looking fresh and smug, I knew he scored. Mandy got handed a role as David's personal assistant. People at the company were buzzing. Mandy, seeing me in the break room, arrogantly said, "Helen, you're nothing special. What was your position when you first started?" She covered her mouth, pretending to be sympathetic, but her eyes were full of malice, an intern, right? I calmly stirred my coffee, watching her act. "I'm David's personal secretary now. I need help understanding. Could you tell me which is higher, intern or secretary? You've got makeup caked on your face." Knowing how to make someone unravel in seconds is an art, one I happen to excel at. "Helen." She yelled, and I took a sip of coffee, then expertly splashed it on her face, adding loudly, "If David didn't teach you manners, I will. In this company, I'm a manager, technically your superior." Her level is laughably low. What on earth blinded me last life to fall for her schemes? Soon, the place outside my office turned chaotic. "Helen? Where is she? Look at what she did to my secretary." David shouted loudly. I opened the door and saw a cocky David and a timid Mandy with 2 prominent slap marks on her face. Seeing me, David instantly yelled, "Helen! You're a manager, not even a VP yet, and you dare hit my secretary? Don't push your luck." Even pulling that stunt on herself. Gossip started swirling. Arms crossed, I watched the two act out. Mandy looked very wronged, with messy hair, trying to evoke sympathy. "David, calm down. From the way you're questioning me, I'd think you two are having a fling. You, stop making baseless accusations." "Oh, right, my bad. Forgot David has an overbearing wife at home." David turned red, panting madly, "Stop spouting nonsense. This fool thinks covering it up works. Everyone in the company knows David's wife is no pushover. Every rumor brings her right over, unmatched in her fierceness. If Mandy crosses paths with her, she'll regret it." Someone in the crowd couldn't help but laugh out loud. Manager Helen definitely gave them a taste of their own medicine. That bald old man often takes advantage, making lots of employees suffer quietly. Hearing the laughter, David spun around madly. "Why were you gathered here? Get back to work. Want to lose your bonus?" I knocked on the glass nearby to cut him off. "David, this is my office. You're out of line here. Mandy never got a chance to speak, but now seeing David leaving, she stepped up, fixing her hair to reveal the slap marks. Helen, I was new and ignorant. I'm sorry. She looked up with teary, resilient eyes, clearly trying to seduce. When I looked up, I saw John in the hallway. He seemed to be checking out the scene, then walked over. What happened here? Seeing John, David suddenly perked up. John, look at how Helen treated my little secretary. I can't stand seeing that pretty face hurt. Just then, I chimed in dryly, if you care so much, just marry her. David shot me a glare. John, you've got to do something for me. Helen, come to my office. Mandy quickly ran to John, bravely lifting her head, saying, Helen didn't mean it, John. It's all my fault, please don't blame Manager Helen. That kind of look, one that says, take me, I'm irresistible, but John's not into women, so she's barking up the wrong tree. Alright, that's enough. This matter's closed. Without glancing at Mandy, John gestured to me to follow him and then walked away. As I walked past Mandy, I scoffed a bit, mocking her for having the nerve to try and set me up, thinking she could pull strings behind my back. By the time I left John's office, the company had already sent out the notice appointing me as the new VP. To celebrate my promotion, I anonymously sent photos and videos of Mandy being cozy with David to his wife. I was sure tomorrow would be quite entertaining. The next day, I got to work early to watch the drama unfold. When I saw David, his face was swollen and bruised, with scratches on his cheeks and neck. It was clear he had a rough night. Who's Mandy? A loud voice demanded, making everyone stop what they were doing. People looked around, some even smirking at the commotion. Mrs. Susan stormed in, tossing papers into the air. They scattered everywhere. I picked one up. It was a picture of Mandy and David kissing, along with explicit photos and flirty messages. Everyone was buzzing with chatter. So that's how she got the promotion. Must have been desperate to go that far. David, looking pale and hopeless, said, let's talk about this at home, not here, in front of everyone. Move. Mrs. Susan snapped, shoving him aside. Her gaze passed over us like X-rays. With a resounding slap, she shoved David again, just as Mandy walked out of the bathroom. What's happening? There you are, you little tramp. Mrs. Susan charged at Mandy, slapping her left and right, until Mandy was dazed. Mrs. Susan then yanked on Mandy's hair, whipping out her phone to record. I'm going to show everyone what a mistress you are. Didn't your mother teach you anything? I will. Mandy, stunned, finally came to and shouted, let me go. I'll call the police. Her threat made Mrs. Susan even more furious, and she spat on Mandy's face. You shameless mistress, calling the police? Mandy looked at David, crying, David, help me. But he was too scared to intervene, avoiding her gaze. Mandy had always been spoiled, with Mike treating her like royalty before our marriage. Afterward, I always gave in to her, which made her unbearable. This was what she got for being reckless. Her eyes scanned the room desperately, locking onto mine. Helen. Help me. The crowd was shocked, and I just stood there watching. Oh, you've got to help her? Mrs. Susan wondered out loud. I'm no longer married to your brother, I replied, my words cold and distant. I wasn't going to clean up the mess I created. Despair clouded Mandy's eyes. Someone called the police worried about the potential harm. By the time they arrived, Mandy was nearly incoherent, mumbling pitifully, I was wrong, don't hit me anymore. I wasn't clear on the aftermath, just that Mandy ended up in the hospital, and Mrs. Susan claimed she was injured in a mutual fight. The police saw on security footage that Mandy did resist, leading to Mrs. Susan's minor injury. The whole fiasco ended with some compensation being paid. William got fired due to the negative impact, while I continued smoothly with my work. Soon, the company wanted me to expand business overseas for 2 years. This was a big test for me. If successful, it would mean another promotion. Then, I got a text, a video of my mom taking care of Mandy. Mandy looked into the camera, smiling provocatively. If I didn't get the hint, I'd be an idiot. So, I sent it to Mrs. Susan. I figured she'd handle the nuisance. After all, a mistress taunting the wife with a video, now that's juicy. As for my parents wanting to work for Mandy's family, that was their choice. We were no longer related. Mandy sending me that video was asking for trouble. People who bring misfortune on themselves have to live with the consequences. After a few days, I packed up and started my new work overseas. 2 years isn't that long, but it went by quickly. During that time, David reached out, telling me my parents came looking for me. But they always came back empty-handed. Mandy got into gambling, even stole house titles for collateral, and pawned my parents' valuable jewelry. When loan sharks got involved, my parents realized too late their house was gone. Now, they rent and are harassed by debt collectors. Mike lost his job too and resorted to manual labor, but even that couldn't cover their rising debts. He even got his leg broken by the loan sharks and missed a crucial medical treatment, ending in an amputation. After Mandy owed money and disappeared, they were left to deal with the mess, much like me from before. But now, roles reversed, I was the one watching their downfall. Back from abroad, as I reached my apartment complex, I saw my parents. They looked much older, hunched, with graying hair. I didn't even glance their way, just drove by. At home, I called property management to ensure they'd keep my parents away. They assured me they wouldn't return, and I finally felt relieved. With an empty fridge back home, I headed to the grocery store. Out of nowhere, my parents emerged from the bushes. "Helen. Is it you, Helen?" They called, grabbing my hand. With a frown, I listened to them. "We were wrong, Mandy's no good. She stole our documents, and now we're homeless and hunted by loan sharks. Please forgive us, you've done so well." My mom's greedy eyes scanned my outfit, her face eager. But life isn't that simple. They tossed me aside when I was inconvenient, and now, when they need me, they expect help. I looked at them coldly, reminded them we were no longer related, and warned if they didn't let go, I'd call security. My mom's face hardened. "Helen, we raised you. How can you be so heartless? When you cut ties with me, did you think of this day?" I said bluntly. Their faces fell. I shook off their grip. "Some things aren't just words. Don't come back, or I'll see you in court." I turned and left without another word. Behind me, they shouted, "Helen, you're a traitor, a heartless traitor. Let them think what they want. This life of mine? I live it on my terms."